Hello and welcome to this episode of Rule of Carnage. This is a podcast, set of video conversations, chats between myself, Glenn Ford, a game designer and developer, and my good chum Mike Hutchinson, also a game designer and developer, where we talk about designing better miniatures games. Today we are going to talk about diegesis.
Such a fun word to say, isn't it?
It's a lovely word, very very Greek feeling. Um, so we've been sort of thinking and conversing over the last few conversations about sort of the detail of a game, where you want to attract people's attention, where you want them to be within like genre tropes of a particular game. Um, and one of the things about attracting people to the genre tropes of your game is that you want them to enjoy what it is like to be a dot dot dot. Oh, this is just what it's like to be a pirate swashbuckling and jumping about. Oh, this is what it's like to be a mad like wastelander in my car smashing people to oblivion. That sort of enjoyment is what we are, rightly or wrongly, going to term diegetic enjoyment in this conversation. It is enjoyment within the world of your game, the reality of your game. At the same time, as you're playing your game, you're going to be going like at times, hopefully, if things have been done well, as a really clever mechanic. It was elegant. I like how it sort of covered a lot of things with a single rule that was smart, and you had to learn one thing and it did like 10 things. Or like I rolled a 6. Yay! Sixes are cool. Or I won this game. These are all examples of non-diegetic enjoyment. They are fun that does not exist in the game world, but comes like from the game for the players. Obviously, you want your game to be fun, like to a certain given value of fun, engaged, whatever you want to call it. So, like figuring out how much juice we can squeeze through these two forms of enjoyment in and out of the game world, around the game, making sure that one of them doesn't, get in the way of the other one, is probably quite important for designing your games. So we're going to have a conversation about it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, like one of the things that I was trying to wrestle with, I'll be completely honest, because I have to explain my decision of quitting my job to go and make miniature games to a number of people in my life. And they know that I love miniature games, but it has raised the question of like, why do I love miniature games so much? And also, I don't necessarily design other kinds of games. Like I don't design board games and card games at the moment. Maybe I will in the future, but there's something about the miniature world, the little world in front of me, that is particularly interesting. And the gentle viewer might have seen my somewhat ludicrous experiment with a chess sort of. Well, basically, you and I were having a conversation about 6 weeks ago, 6 episodes back, where chess but with list building was mentioned, and that caught my imagination, and some terrible things happened as a result. So anyway, the idea of chess 28, which is like, what if chess was miniature agnostic, really cuts to this difference between like, why does chess but it's miniature agnostic make me really excited, whereas chess just makes me really cross and like bored at the same time. I don't know what that emotional state is, but like it's real, and I have
I'm sure
it.
the Germans have a word for it.
And I I don't mind abstract board games, but I don't choose to play them anything like as much as themey board games. And we talk like, in the board game world, we talk a lot about theme and whether the abstraction of the game is at all related to the theme, or if it's just pasted over the top of an abstract set of mechanics. Um, but I think in miniature games, we are very much more programmed to, or we very much more expect to create mechanics that map quite cleanly onto like the theme. And so we're creating mechanics which are about like this Space Marine being able to shoot this gun at that guy through this piece of terrain. And I think that's partly the historical roots of it, but I think it's also because our little figures are quite specific and physical. And so the idea of taking a very abstracted mechanic and then trying to place it on top of miniatures, like you would with a board game, kind of confuses people. And I've had this criticism comment on A Billion Suns are like, well, it's just a board game, but you happen to play it with miniatures. And I think that all of this is sort of like rattling around my head, trying to figure out what is it that I love about having theme. And we know we talked about that word being inaccurate, but what is it about having this kind of game world animated in front of me that doesn't happen in chess and that doesn't happen in abstract board games, but does happen in video games and does happen in the best miniature games. And so I think it's absolutely this what we were struggling for a word, and we were chatting about film terminology and diegetic music. If you haven't encountered it in film studies, is when there is music that's inside the world of the film. So the Star Wars Cantina band is diegetic music. The opening theme as the credits roll is non-diegetic music. It's not heard by the characters. It doesn't exist inside the world. And I think there's a lot of stuff that we choose to put into games, or that we choose to put mechanics around, or that we extract enjoyment from, which are because they're happening in the game world. And quite often, I think there's we spent a bunch of time talking previously about the distinction between like competitive versus narrative. And I think maybe a much more helpful way of talking about that is like there are players who are looking for more diegetic enjoyment from the games. They want the game to speak to them in game world terms, and they want to get more juice from squeezing the game, which tastes like having fun in that world. Whereas there are some players who, if the world doesn't isn't particularly attractive to them, or it's not generating very much interest on the table, they're fine as long as there's mechanical interest, there's logical puzzles, there's good game design to interact with. I've used the word game design there, but I don't like to use the word games design there because I think games design is both of these things. But like, there's non-diegetic enjoyment to be had from, and this is where chess comes in. It's like chess is, infinitely interesting to the certain kind of person because it's got all of this completely meta sort of nothing to do with the world of the little, armies go battling on the chess field. But lots of people get a ton of non-diegetic enjoyment from that, and I don't think I'm a competitive player or a narrative player. I think I'm a person who appreciates a really nice mix of, non-diegetic enjoyment from crunchy, good mechanics that work elegantly, that also link into the game world and inspire this, imagination sort of, it summons up imaginings of what's going on, and it represents what's going in the game world really well, and it gets my imagination firing. And I think the reason I want to give these two things terms is because I quite often when I'm working on a design, I don't necessarily haven't really had any way of conceptually separating those things. And I definitely feel that like it's narrative versus competitive. It doesn't work for me. And it's not because I feel angry about that definition. It's just like it doesn't work for me. It's logically inaccurate.
I think that like say sort of okay, non-diegetic enjoyment is or look at this mechanic or I have won the game.
Mm.
But also non-diegetic enjoyment is ha ha ha. Mike wasn't expecting me to do that. Look at his face now that I have
Yeah,
done.
yeah, yeah. The social stuff, absolutely.
Or
100%.
so social gaming. The social part of gaming is non-diegetic enjoyment, which I think is a sort of very central part to sort of
Yeah, like social deduction games. Some social deduction games are very non-diegetic in that they are about fooling each other because of language, and some have an element of role playing in, and therefore like have a game world that you step into, which is fun, as well as having the non-diegetic sort of puzzle, social deduction stuff in.
Yeah, and I think like a minute ago you were saying like you play like fewer board games. I know that you like a fake artist goes to New York, which is a game sort of so barely with a theme to it that I don't even know who the fake artist is and why they're going to New York, and why when they go to New York they have to construct a picture out of random lines.
But I always introduce the game with that conceit, and someone around the table, like often I've played it with 8 or 10 people, and a couple of those people, the conceit matters, and that like provides for them a source of diegetic enjoyment where they're like, oh, I'm pretending to be an artist in New York. Oh, well, this is suddenly interesting. Whereas the other 8 people will just be like, so it's just Pictionary, right?
But I think, the point I was sort of going to there is that the thing about Fake Artist Goes to New York is it's a really small game. It's really
Mm.
short. An atom of play is very small. It's physically sort of tiny, and a lot of board games are sort of conceptually, physically, engagement wise, smaller than minis games. The sort of minis games we talk about are what some people refer to as like lifestyle games.
Mm.
You have to acquire the minis, you have to paint the minis, you have to like learn a whole bunch of rules. And sometimes, because I think you're right in that the idea of one of these games with no diegetic element to it whatsoever is weird. It's weird. I really
Yeah,
struggle.
no, I can imagine playing something that resembles 40K, but with like various colored wooden blocks on like an abstract wooden block table. But like even at that point, I would translate it into that scene in Control where you have like an abstract combat zone, or that thing in Assassin's Creed 2 where you have an abstract combat zone. Like
Yeah,
I would still just be tempted to lay a diegetic
well, yeah.
enjoyment across the top of it.
As soon as you're saying like, okay, well, I'll be playing 40k with just blocks and markers, right? And would that block and marker be shooting that other block and marker? Would the other block and marker then die if it did? It's like, oh, yeah, there we
No,
go.
yeah, no, it would have to interact at range and cause it to non-exist.
I mean, but range the right word in that at that point? Is it a ranged interaction when you're not actually
Makes a yeah,
firing something?
it makes a vector interaction.
You perform, and because this is one of the things, because in a separate sort of conversation we've been talking about the nature of like conceits within games, that like I'm shooting you, well, I'm not shooting you, but the conceit of the game is that I am shooting you. And when you try and talk about these sorts of games without any of that language, it's it's impossible.
Mm.
It's impossible to explain what the hell is going on in one of these games without any use of any of that sort of terminology, only referring to the like mechanical realities of the game is just
Right.
crushingly
Whereas,
difficult.
exactly as you point out, in Fate Artist in New York, we simply have to explain what we're doing, which is you have to draw one line, continuous line, and then pass the piece of paper on.
Yeah,
And there doesn't have to be any wrapping of the game world story about it. We left the story at the opening description of the game. It was irrelevant then. It remains irrelevant throughout the entire
yeah.
gameplay.
And it's like a lot of board games, I think, obviously abstract board games, like fully abstract board games, we don't need the sort of the conceit language in order to explain what is going on when you're like laying down tiles in Genius or something. And a lot of the sort of hardcore Euros, or what we call Euros generally, you don't really need the theme. I don't super need the theme to play viticulture. I could totally get through that without you ever referring to any of these things as grapes or wine or a maturing room. You could say, you move that block to there, it has to stay there for that amount of time. This card is worth that many points, etc., etc. But when we get to these sorts of miniatures games, there's like so many moving parts, and the way that those moving parts relate to each other are so intrinsically to do with these sort of these in-world explanations that I feel like the diegetic nature of these games is like an emergent property, like consciousness within the human mind. It's like I don't think you could do this without it just popping out some diegetic moments of saying, oh, that guy runs fast, that's why he gets to move. And then it's like, okay, well, we're doing it now.
Right. And so here I think is where we reach something that's been bothering me for a while, which is like one thing that, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but one thing that you kind of talked about a few times before on this channel, which I've nodded along to and I like 80% agree with, is like if you don't use the miniature, like why are you creating one of these games? Like if the miniature itself isn't doing a thing mechanically, like it could just be a disc. Why isn't it a disc? Like what are we doing here? And if you've got a disc, why can't we have squares? And why aren't we just making a board game? And I follow all of that up to a point, but I think this concept gives me another route into something, which is the use of miniatures, painted miniatures, lovingly constructed miniatures, terrain, um, arranged in such a way that I'm not constrained by discrete squares, like on a board, it gives me access to this imagination triggering game world that, um as I've been working on this chess 28 game, like putting these figures on that are like, well, the figures that I choose in the collection that I choose, and the terrain is the terrain that I've selected. Like, it just evokes and triggers my imagination in a way that compellingly justifies the existence of the miniatures beyond their function non-diegetically, if that makes any sense. Like, they don't need to function as miniatures to serve a function in the game design, which is to trigger my imagination and therefore my enjoyment. And I'm having more fun because there are miniatures.
I mean, it's fair enough that you are having more fun because there are miniatures, but it's like, I eat food because of the way it tastes. The fact that it comes with vitamins, and minerals isn't the reason I'm eating it. However, if you said here's a carrot that has no vitamins and minerals in it, I think I probably wouldn't eat it. I think it'd be like, okay, it's not what I'm there for, but I'm still going to refuse it if it's not in there. And it's like, I
But
think
in this example, are you saying you don't like carrots? You just eat them for their purpose? Because
that,
I do like carrots, which are miniatures in this bizarrely unspooling metaphor. Like, I like
you
miniatures.
really like
Like,
the end.
miniatures don't need vitamins. If they contain vitamins, double good.
I'm saying that the game has miniatures in it. I'm not necessarily coming to the game or the design for the miniatures, but I understand the miniatures have a purpose, and it's good that the miniatures are in the game. And probably if the miniatures weren't in that game, I would say I'd rather play one with miniatures in it.
Mm.
But they're still not sort of necessarily why I'm at the design, in front of the design in that sort of world. I'm there because I'm interested in what the game is going to do. I own a considerable number of miniatures, anyway. I don't need a game to be bringing to me the idea of more miniatures in my life. I don't need more miniatures in my life by any stretch of the imagination. You know, if a game can be like, okay, just use whatever minis you happen to have around. And this is one of the things about miniatures agnosticism that I like, that there are games that sort of go, use the miniatures you've already got. Let's just chill out about the miniatures, guys.
Hmm.
Let's relax about what they are. Let's play this game.
Right, and I think that like, mantra of this channel, that absolutely just goes down to what your objectives for a particular game or a particular design, or as a designer, are. Because I think that, yeah, in many cases, like, I might create games, not in many cases, there are some cases where I might create games specifically, with this idea that, well, I don't necessarily want to inspire you to create miniatures, or I don't care for you to create miniatures. Take Pacific Command, for example. I am very excited about the non-diegetic sort of components of that. Although I am very excited about the in world sort of, a lot of it's very diegetic. It just doesn't have miniatures in it. But in this case, like, maybe that's just a difference between our styles and our tendency towards setting goals for ourselves, which is, I am excited. I am excited to be set hobby challenges, and therefore I will set other people hobby challenges. You are less excited to receive hobby challenges, so you are less excited to give them as a designer to others.
I suppose in reality, for me, it's this sort of thing. Okay, so I mean, Puke Apocalypse is a really sort of good example. It has hobby literally baked into the rules. It
Very
literally
much, yeah.
forces you to do hobby as part of the rules. And so obviously, I'm giving people, hobby challenges, but that's because I'm like, oh, I want to give you something for doing your hobby, and I
Mm.
want to enter you back into that loop, and I want all of this to be a sort of a holistic experience. All the things you are doing about this game feed into the other bits of the game. And I'm not going to go, here's the game and here's some hobby, because if I'm going to do that, that's the thing I don't need. And you can have it or not have it. What I want is to do that. And I want to go like, they're really part of each other, and they
Mm.
really care about each other, and they really feed into each other. And in a way, it's like, that's not my sort of not caring about the hobby and making miniatures and painting miniatures and all sorts of those sorts of things. I do that because I care about it, because I want to give it extra value, and I want it to be intrinsic to the game, and I want to say like it. Oh,
Mm.
it really matters for this game. That's how much I care about it. You can't play this game without doing hobby. That's how much I'm going to make you do
Mm.
hobby.
Yeah, and I also fundamentally think that it's your particular artistic expression of that, and that's what's so good about it, is that there's no correct way to approach this part. It's simply, what is the offer you wish to put in front of your players? And some players will take certain offers and some players won't take other offers. And some people will be motivated by some things and some people will look for other motivations. One player will come to that and go, amazing, I'm being invited to do hobby, and everything that I do in regards to that is linked into the game and it matters and it's meaningful. And another player will come in and go, well, I'm being constrained and I've got this slightly different idea that doesn't quite fit and it's not being permitted and I am annoyed by that. And you can't please all the people all the time, and you need to be focused about what your design is. And in this case, you've been very focused about it. I think what to sort of go back a few paragraphs, like why I'm excited about this idea of understanding for the first time for myself something like some conceptual wrapper for why miniatures might matter in creating and evoking fun in other players, is that it gives me a way of um not making an excuse for, like, just conceptualizing why I am excited by doing something different to what you've described there. um and and I think that you've ended up putting a very nice relationship between the game world and the rules world, and that's very tightly mixed together. And there are some other games which separate those two things much more. They make those things much more incidental to each other. It's nice to have hobby. It's nice to have game. They will bump into each other on the table, but they're not, to a degree. Hobgoblin is very much like this. Hobgoblin has placed those things in proximity to each other, but not really wired them together in any meaningful way deliberately.
I mean, yeah, I mean, Hobgoblin has done it to a degree that's almost avant-garde in a way, because it's like, I mean, components like teach rules, and the great sort of value in many ways of miniatures for like teaching people rules and helping people through the game is, which of these is more powerful than the other?
Yeah, you
This
can
is
read
more
it across the table. Yeah.
this is more powerful, important than this. I don't need to teach you any rules. I need to show
Mm.
you these two things, and you instantly know who is important, who matters, who's vital for the game. In Hobgoblin, no, not particularly. Not in any particular way. Not necessarily.
You'll have
This
to
guy
ask.
could be like way more important and powerful than this guy, which is like it's an insane in its own way, an insane choice to make, to go like, how much like miniatures instantly teach rules and position and relationship between two forces and progress within the game. you
Well,
know
but the difference. So I think what is missing from that description is that um, I wrote that in with an assumption that the context is that you play miniature games. Like, I don't imagine Hobgoblin to be anyone's first miniature games. It might be someone's first rank and flank game, but I don't think that necessarily counts in the same way. So, like, I'm not having to teach people to read the basic sort of lay of the land of how these games function. I'm offering like a particular niche experience, which I think is exciting and missing. And so, yes, components teach rules, but also, like, you bring a bunch of baggage in with you.
and this is the thing, it's like within the world in which I've played X many years of Warhammer Fantasy Battle, Hobgoblin slots in and it's very comfortable and it does some interesting, exciting mechanical things, but a lot of the stuff just makes sense within that world. And without that world, it's a fucking art piece.
Maybe.
It's borderline surreal if you don't come from that world and you're just like, anything can be anything all of the time. Gee, you have blown my mind, sir.
Well, I love that other people have started, like, going, all right, I've got some like barbarian berserkers, but I'm going to call them a chariot because that, like, has the right rules description. I'm like, yes, that's exactly what you're supposed to do.
And
And you're absolutely right. Like at that point, people are like, what? So these berserkers have two wheels and are pulled by horses? No, not relevant. Like
I know, yeah,
unplug that part of your brain.
and it's yeah,
Which is odd, which is oddly extremely non-diegetic approach to it. It's like, well, what's the most rules appropriate way of describing this unit so I can get the most evocative flavor from this unit and it behaves exactly as it's supposed to, and the fiction it like tells itself on the battlefield.
yeah, no, and it is it's a very it's an
So maybe
oddly
I've gone the other
meta.
way around and I've connected theme and mechanics like arse about face.
Well, in a way, it's an oddly meta game sometimes. It's been really fascinating in the Discord seeing different people coming to it and people butting up against. Okay, so this word means X, and what I mean by that word is X. So why isn't it doing X? It's like that word's just a word. It's just a label that's just been pinned onto a rule. I don't care.
Mike needed a mechanic and he had to give it a name.
Yeah, and that's the rule. That's the name he picked for it. Name it 50 different other things. It doesn't matter. That's what the
Well, at one point, and I think I took this bit out. At one point, the keyword system said keywords have like a canonical name, which is like their machine code name, but you're allowed to name them anything you like as the player, as long as it's not one of the other reserved machine code names. So you've got something called bloodthirsty, which means if you eliminate a unit, you get you heal some damage essentially. And like, if you're a vampire, that's totally like, yeah, it's the red thirst, like cool. Or if I'm like ghouls and I'm eating them, like amazing, or trolls or something. But equally, it could be like, it could be any number of things, and none of those are bloodthirsty necessarily. Like, if you're like well trained and you get to like a point in the battlefield and you eliminate the enemy and like the trumpet goes and you're like, yes, okay, we're absolutely rigorous. And it's like, it's an expression of your grit and determination, and that rule would have a different name. It wouldn't be called bloodthirsty, but it would be functionally identical. But obviously that's ludicrous. You can't allow everyone to just make up the names of rules all day long. But
No, absolutely, and to me, it's really interesting. Like that you have a certain position about miniatures, and you've made like Pacific Command that doesn't have miniatures in it, and you've made Hobgoblin that lets you bring your miniatures, but doesn't care about what miniatures you use. It wants you to have fun with them, but it doesn't put any weight on it one way or another, or name things. Or yeah, chariot can be an angel, can be a monster, whatever it can be. And because that's your like particular perspective of like the minis are assumed, now let's have some fun with them.
yeah,
You've
yeah,
gone to
yeah.
this place where you've got this thing that, because I assume you love miniatures, this doesn't care about them in a really weird sort of meta, like almost modern art way. At some point, Hobgoblin is like super old school, but super like bizarrely hyper meta as a game, depending on how you look at it. It's just
Yeah.
it's an interesting thing. And if you think that is an interesting thing, if you like the idea of diegesis in a game, if you enjoy non-diegetic moments, if you've had a game that's really had its theme and genre and play really meshed together, tell us about it in the comments section. If when they mesh together that upsets you because it constrains you in the other part of the game that you want to enjoy, tell us about that in the comments section as well. If you're telling us about things in the comments section, do hit the like and subscribe buttons, and then look at the links that are down there just above the comments but below this.
Yeah.
And in there's a link to the Discord. Follow through, chat to us in there. And also there's a link to Mike's Patreon. Swing past there, give him money, and he will continue to enjoy his metaverse of creativity, and you will feel happy, and you will be brought into that metaverse also, the Mike Gamic universe, the MGU. For now, from this episode, the Rule of Carnage, it's going to be a thank you and goodbye. So thank you and goodbye.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.
Yeah, the comments about your Patreon are now just going to have to get like longer and more obscure,
More ludicrous.
more ludicrous as this goes on.